Hello, everyone. We're going to get started today. Hello, and welcome. I'm Jackie Glover, Executive Director of the Black Film Project at the Hutchins Center, and I'm very happy to be introducing today's guest speaker. Mamadou Dia is a filmmaker from Senegal whose work explores history, silence, and moral complexity through fiction and documentary. He is a graduate of NYU Tisch School of the Arts, where his short film, Samedi Cinema, premiered at the Venice and Toronto International Film Festivals. His debut feature, Bamum Nafi, set in northern Senegal, won the Best First Feature Award at Locarno, screening at more than 80 film festivals worldwide. His second feature, Demba, premiered at the Berlin Film Festival. Both films were released theatrically in Senegal, and both were the country's official submissions to the Academy Awards. A Guggenheim and Creative Capital Fellow, Mamadou is currently developing Augustus, an historical film inspired by the life of 19th century African-American daguerreotypist Augustus Washington. Mamadou is a visiting professor of fiction filmmaking at Harvard University and a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. Let's please welcome Mamadou Dia.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure to talk about film and filmmaking, especially in these spaces and this time. So today I want to talk about cinema as transmission, oral knowledge, and Black visual culture. I think it's very important. I'm in Harvard this year. This is my first year, my second semester to be here, and I appreciate the space. I appreciate that we got a space where we can share, we can discuss, we can talk openly. Maybe not as much as I would like to, but at least discussions are going. And today I'm going to not talk as a scholar because I'm a filmmaker, and I believe in what Bell Hooks' theory about creating through our own experiences. Because my personal lives are the ones that dictate the films I'm trying to make and the films I'm making. And today I want to contribute to this debate by sharing my perspective as a filmmaker. I also worked as a journalist for almost 10 years based in Senegal. And I want to talk about knowledge production. I want to talk about ethics. I want to talk about authorship. And I want to start by saying before I thought about cinema, I learned how to listen. Because I studied with oral tradition as not sources of making movies, but as methods. And I want to talk today about the ways in oral tradition we understand time and the ways in entering people's lives. In oral storytelling, listening is active. We are not listening to a story to understand it. We're listening about it because we've been trusted to listen to that story. And to me, that's something that cinema can learn. Hi, Raven. So cinema today, I think, does the opposite. We are trained to look quickly. We are assuming that seeing is the same as understanding. So this talk begins as a simple idea when cinema becomes more precise and maybe more ethical, when it learns to listen before it looks. So this is my hometown. This is where I was born. This is called Matam, very tiny. And the river you see here is the Senegal River that gave its name to the country. And the other side is a different country called Mauritania, where they speak Arabic, where I actually need a visa to get there. And you can literally swim across. So before cinema, to me, the life of telling stories came from rhythm, came from silences. It came from languages and stories that unfolded slowly. At home, we didn't own a TV. I used to go to my neighbors to watch TV program. And we spoke Fula or Fulani at home. But at school, everything was in French. The stories that my grandmother told us at night, some of them didn't make sense to me. Some of them did make sense way later. And I think talking about this talk again is how to, in film, we are really rushing into the show, not tell. No, tell, not show. What is the saying again? Show, not tell. But then it means at the same time, that the people you're showing to know how to see. And then in oral tradition is way reversed. So when my grandmother is telling me a story, she's not explaining to me the end. She's telling it and letting it sit with me. These are the movies I grew up watching from our national TV. It was one channel called Télévision Nationale. And at Wednesday, we had always African movies. This is a movie from Burkina Faso called Yaba by Idrissa Ouedraogo. Movies from Bollywood was the only movies that weren't dubbed. We don't speak in Hindi, but we would watch them, even for the people who didn't know how to translate those movies. Godzilla, I like this poster because the artist who was making them is from a small town called Chess. They would call him from France and explain the movie, what it was about, before the movie get to Senegal. At this time, movies would travel by boat, and he had to make the poster to get people ready to watch the film. So this is someone who made the poster before seeing the film. And to me, film was always related, retold stories, and is always, to me, a way of translating. And my first job in this small town of Senegal was writing letters. So as a kid, people would call me and dictate the letters they would write. And this was pre-mobile phone eras. So I would transcribe it in French because I was one of the few kids who went to school to learn French. I'm going to talk about that more later. And coming back about tradition of orality and talking and using that to transpose it into film, I want to quote the Senegalese philosopher, Souleymane Bachir Diagne. And what he says is, to translate is to acknowledge that there is a plurality of languages. It is a decolonizing gesture in a way, because you are saying that all human languages are equivalent and equal. And at the same time, he says, qui traduit trahit, which is a French saying that when you translate, you betray. But he's saying also that betrayal is not necessarily negative, because by betraying, you're creating something new. So by taking those oral stories that I heard from my childhood and trying to translate them in film, it's not going to be a translation per se. It's also creating a new way of telling the story. So to me, filmmaking became something of translating across the world, because the desire to communicate is not only through different languages that I grew up with, it also through different mediums. This is still from the movie that I mentioned before, Samedi Cinema. This is the kid writing letters. Because I was one of the people who were schooled in speaking French, so writing and reading letters was one of my jobs. It allowed me to enter private spaces as a kid. I was 11 or 12 years old. And the Fula community is a very polished one, where we don't show much emotions. He knows about what I'm talking about. So everything is contained, but by allowing me to be in those spaces, I learned a lot from those families, from those adult lives. And those letters, they belong to people who couldn't read, who trusted me with a language that I was myself learning. And when they got the answers weeks later, I would be also called back to read the answers. And some of the people would always write the same letter. So I would sit down, start writing before even they start dictating. And some others would write and not get answers from that. And I think my favorite moment in writing those letters was adults from all around the world who would respond by correcting my French first. So part of that letter was actually addressed to me directly as a writer. And I really appreciate that. So in that translation, there was words that I didn't know how to say in French. So it was always negotiating what I'm trying to say. So then I think that opacity also might be respected. And I think still in filmmaking, that opacity sometimes is something that scares us as author or even as audience. We want it to be clear. So this short film was an homage to filmmakers. I have a character that I called Semben, like Ousmane Semben. And it came also from lived experience, how to take your life into the fiction world. And this is about two friends who want to watch a movie in Dakar, Senegal. When I was a kid, there was a theater in my small town that I showed, and it closed down. And I think there was an experience that we all shared as a moment that was tragic. And I remember this film was 10, 11 minutes long. We did it at NYU as part of our program. I remember showing it to my brother, who's an engineer, and I told him, that film you've watched got into a festival. And he literally told me, I didn't see it, I only saw the trailer. So this understanding of making a film, even within my family, is something I'm still learning to negotiate. And I used the griot, who is the storyteller in our society, who is also a historian. And so this was part of the film school that we had to make a movie. I decided to go back to Senegal to make my film with some crew members from my school. So I'm going to show Samedi Cinema because it's just 10 minutes, and then we can keep discussing. I can't believe this was made 10 years ago. Thank you. And you probably heard Malcolm X as the film being played. It was the first movie I've seen on a big screen. So I always went to TVs of my neighbors, and then one day our teacher brought this just white sheet and a projector, and he showed Malcolm X. And of course it was dubbed. And of course we hated it, because we said nothing happens, there is no action, there is no drama happening there. There is only one gunshot at the end of the movie. But then, if you remember the opening scene, the American flag is burning and becomes an X. And I think at that age, I've burnt enough stuff to know that's not possible. And I think that's how I realized there is a director, there is someone who's making this. And then 25 years later, Spike Lee was one of our professors, and I told him the story. He said, I cannot give you the right to use the images, but you can use the sound of the film and the posters. So that's how it became part of this story. And to me, it's very important to talk about movies also from Senegal. And I think one of the less known things about Francophone Africa is making movies wasn't allowed. We couldn't make movies until we got independent in 1960. There is literally a decree called the Laval Decree in 1934. So we were just banned from making movies. That's why there is not that many movies before the 1960s, because the colonial power knew that cinema was a dangerous tool to be used. And I still can't wrap my head about that, because we just started making movies less than 80 years ago. It's very recent. And you probably know the guy on the left, Ousmane Sembène, considered one of the first filmmakers in the continent to have made a feature film, all in Senegal. However, there is a short film that survived from 1955. These are a group of students who were studying in Paris, France. So they said maybe there is a gray zone here. We cannot make movies back home, but maybe in Paris we can. They took their camera and made this short film called Afrique sur Seine. Seine is the river that went through Paris. So what they did is, almost a letter to how much nostalgia they have to the home they lived. So there is a voiceover carrying over their lives. It's just a 21-minute movie. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube today. So cinema started as a political visibility. It's not just an aesthetic tool because they were saying something. And there is also talks about another film that was made supposedly in Guinea in 1953 called the Muramani. There is a documentary called Le Cimetière de la Pellicule, the cemetery of, what is the English title? And this is a filmmaker who is going back to search that film, if it did exist actually in 1953. So, and I'm happy to talk about that during the discussion. So, listening can be collaborative. That's what Ousmane Sembène said. This is Jean Rouch, who is an ethnographer who made a lot of movies in West Africa from France, because they said filming can always be extractive or can be a collaboration. Ousmane Sembène famously said about him, he is filming us like ants, like the insects. So Sembène broke from local languages because to this time, movies were only made with voiceover and in French. And Sembène's story is very interesting because he was a novelist who wrote many novels, and at some point he said, I'm writing for people who don't read in French. Instead of writing novels, I'm going to make movies. So he was almost 40 years old, to Russia to study filmmaking. That's how he started making movies. And if you watch his movies, they're kind of very didactical. He's literally telling you from A to Z what is happening, because his aim is the political consciousness of the people. And cinema in this case is listening, but also talking about accountability. I think this is what happens when we stop listening and we just make attention to noise. So when I was doing my MFA, this happened in the US. And in New York, it was a shock. Like, nobody could believe it. How does it happen? How can we vote for someone like this? And how much of it was reality? Because I worked in journalism for so many years, traveled a lot. And I think we ignored the signs of how it happened, especially for us living in big cities. So the question was like, how do societies listen? How do we get there? That's how I returned to my hometown, and I made another film called Bamum Nafi. And Bamum Nafi is about extremism, not the violent part of it, not the explosive part of it, but how do we get there as a process? And to me, while I was making that film, where I thought my country was very safe, I got a lot of pushback, even from friends. We were shooting in a mosque. Sheldon, who is also a schoolmate, was there, and they said, he cannot shoot in the mosque. So I had to shoot the scenes in the mosque myself. Friends of mine who were saying, this never happened in this country. You cannot make a movie about extremism if it doesn't happen here. And because I work with non-actors, people from my hometown, in all my movies, there are literally people from that town you've seen, they said we cannot use the name of the town in the film because that doesn't happen here. People might misunderstand it. So I'm going to show you a scene from Bamum Nafi. And to me, this is a scene that is a turning point in the film. Thank you, Krishna.
Bandiraɓe debbo e gorko binde indeji mon e carnet oɗo yo ɓendu duuɓi mon wonande anduɓe adresse leerɗo to jomum addirante awdi mum
hitande fof ni min mbaɗata ta hay puttere min jeyata
min ndemani rawande oɗon mbar min gulani tan mbar min gulani tan bolle puyɗi
lettre ministre agriculture nani hikka so Allah jaɓi on keɓat awdi ndi nde he ƴeewe ɓenni
so wonko mbawɗa addan min toɓo ha ilna guese amen min mbawa lorde makkaji amen e maaroji amen
cohloton min tan ko nde wooteji mon ngari haɗon podana min tan komin jiyata min nanta
bandiraɓe mawni wetteji ɗuni laafaji garane perte yimɓe bandiraɓe almami hokku hen duwaw ceerno simila
no jomiraɗo amin ñagoma cuura amen danda amen waɓe jangguinde amen awo bismillahi min alcheitan irajim غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين
bandiraɓe to jakoroɗo e laamu jakoroɗo e koye mon
Ousmane
alhaji ousmane janggo meɗen koye juuɗe meɗen woni
oho lamɗo minima noon kala ko haɗa waɗa nanara kadi awdi yari koɗo musere men haala ba ɗum ko sa ha ɗum koɗini kewi awdi yari awdi makka
e bandiraɓe
awdi yari
bandiraɓe
puyɗi
goto men hande o ko batuji ɗi mbaɗannoɗen hitande fof
monsieur le maire
kedde o
maire jaltuɗo golle
o yalti
ma jaafoɗa
ya boy ala hen
bandiraɓe so tawi awdi ndiɗo ne manki mi yiwon bisimilla mon galle
oɗon galo o lamɗo o ko lamɗo o galo o jogoro wuuro ngo yonti kay ko wara haji Ousmane o nena Ousmane
nana ɗum de ala ko bonnata koye neydi jeeya
ko jaaɓi ko laaɓi
So this is just a scene from Bamunafi, and also having worked a lot on this topic, we realize there is always a void that they're trying to fill. And this guy is literally talking about the government not being present at all. And this is a reality in many places when political extremism, religious extremism is happening. And there is no spectacle of the extremism. And all the people you see here as non-actors, the guy who had the fun and said at the end, this is just a sign of respect, he is the main character of Demba. So this is just people I know, I work with, I grew up with. And to me it's very important as a process to always go there with a very open script and talk to them and make the film through that. And also, and I think what mattered most was when the film was showing, we have an inflatable screen that we tour the country to show it. Debates sometimes go hours and hours, everyone bringing in what they are, what they have to share. And in that case, we go back to the oral part of this filmmaking. What they say now is even more important to the film being made. The discussion become more important than the actual artifact of making film. And the way of watching film also is very interesting. In the middle of the screening, someone might go out, do something else, and come back. Because you can always ask your neighbor, what did I miss? Oh, you know, the other guy, he did that and did that and did that, and you continue watching, and it's not an issue. You can miss the beginning or the ending or so on. There is no such thing as a spoiler. And I think this is very interesting because the film is just something that allows a discussion for later. And I think it also like what Zadie Smith says about progress is never permanent. We always be threatened and must be redoubled, restated, and reimagined, yet is to survive. So after school, in 2019, I moved from New York. I lived in Harlem for so many years to Charlottesville, Virginia. And the shock between New York and Charlottesville is bigger than the shock between Dakar and New York. Yes, right? Definitely. And COVID hit. Everyone is at home. Everyone is depressed. For the first time of my life, I talked to a therapist. I've never done it before. And once a week, I would meet this person. And soon enough, we started talking about parents, especially the mother, right? I think that's the backbone of therapy. And then I realized I've never made. My mother died when I was 13 as an adolescent. But I lived in denial for so many years. I flat out lied to people. No, my mother is fine. She's in my hometown, because I didn't want to talk about it. So the grief and the inheritance of grief and listening became another movie. Because to me, now I'm available to talk about it 25 years later, because I couldn't before. And it always also comes from oral stories, because the most things I know from her is from neighbors and family members telling me about her. So I went and made another film called Nafi's Father, Bamum Nafi. Made Bamum Nafi before, and this film became Demba. And to make Demba not too hurtful for me on set, I decided not to make it about a child, but about an adult. Not about a mother dying, but a wife dying. So to me, it was a way to disconnect myself with this story. And Demba, who you've seen before, the main character, on working on the script, we decided to work together because our two mothers were friends. And we both went through this grief of losing a mother. And that's how Demba became a film. Actually, we're showing it tomorrow. Raven and I will be in discussion at the Carpenter Center at 6:30. So I'm going to skip the clip for Demba. And always talking about films that use oral tradition as tools or ways of finding things. There is Tukibuki by Djibril Diop Mambeti. There is Félicité by Alain Gomis. And I think these filmmakers really know what is the oral rhythm of cinema, meaning not giving you the answer at the end of the film. Alain has another film called Tay with Saul Williams. And the premise of the movie is he comes back to Senegal because he has to die. But it's never explained why and how. And the film just keeps going. And to me, that's what the story, the trust of the audience. We give the audience the intelligence of saying, this is what I'm taking from the story. Because the story is about the one who's listening more than the one who's talking. And in Demba, we have this celebration called the Tajabon. It's once a year in Senegal. And it's a ritual that is about almost holding time, because rituals, I think, also share that oral part of filmmaking. And in Tajabon, we can translate it as a celebration of death. So the idea is, this is pre-Islam, pre-Christianity, that the elder would meet every year, and they know the night where the angel of death is coming. And the angel of death has a list of people who are going to die that year. And the idea is, because we know he's coming, we cross-dress. I use my wife's clothes, and she used mine. And because we know he's coming, and he thinks we're going to be sad, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to celebrate. We're going to dance, and we're going to eat a lot. So in that idea, when he comes, he is so confused that he doesn't know anymore who's on the list. It's a celebration that allows us to live longer. And in Demba, the celebration is used. And what I see, even though it's a collective healing in the film that viewers might understand it, everyone wants to be explained what the story is about, why the Tajabon is there, what does it mean. And the answer has always been to me, if there is Christmas in a film, we don't explain what Christmas is, even for the people who don't know that. So how do we create that space where I can create from my tradition, from my community, from my story, without over-explaining? Because that would have been an insult to the people I'm making the movies for and to the people I'm making the movies with. So to me, this is the identity I've lived and grew up with. And my next project is also talking about identity before colonial time. So this is Saint Louis of Senegal. It was the capital of West Africa, Francophone West Africa. And this is John Brown. And this picture was taken by Augustus Washington. And to me, this is creating a movie from lack of archives. And these archives lack because of a conscious way of removing them, of not having them there. And Sadia Hatmaran talks about critical fabulation, which is a process in which you just don't create from nowhere, but you create from the margins of what is written. And Augustus Washington was a daguerreotypist. He was part of the Marcus Garvey movement, part of the first 16,000 black Americans who went to Africa and created Liberia. But then during the summers, he would travel around. He would go to Saint Louis of Senegal, which is not far from my hometown. And there is writing about it. He would open a studio where people can come and take pictures. So the research is about talking about these people who are not that known, but is a link between three continents, Africa, Asia, and the US. Because something that we don't know much is photography spreads quickly all around the world. And it was an invention that was maybe one of the biggest in history, where you can freeze your liking, not as a painter, but have it on yourself forever. And Augustus photographed many people, even dead people, for souvenirs. So that was part of the story. So the film is going to happen in Saint Louis. I'm in the research process. And what is make this important or interesting, even though he took one of the most famous picture in the US, because this is the first person who's been hanged for treason in the US, because he was supporting the slave cause. But Augustus didn't leave a picture. We don't know how he looks like. So how do we create a movie from the lack of archives and the lack of pictures? And in that film, I want to also talk about, this is the last queen of Waalo. Waalo is one of the kingdoms of Senegal, around the Saint Louis of Senegal. Queen Dateyalla, she was one of the last ones to stand against the colonial power. Because at the same time Augustus went to Africa, this is around the same time that the French decided not only to do trade, but to militarily occupy West Africa. At first, they were just in the coastal cities, but now they decided instead of trading with them, we're going to just go inside and take it over. We're going to own all the land. So someone is coming from the US looking for freedom where the people are locally exactly losing it at the time. So how do we negotiate power? How do you negotiate representation? And the few surviving images, how do you create from that to make a film? And I think these gaps invite responsibility also, and to be a bit inventive. And by researching this story about an African American living in Africa, because at the end Augustus was very critical about what the black American did to Liberia. He was literally saying we are treating them as the white people have been treating them. But by the research, there is a historian from Senegal called Professor Barry, and his saying is, our challenge between black Africans and black Americans is the only thing is that we've been separated for too long. And I think this is a story that can connect us once again. So this was my talk today. I'm happy to take any questions and how to discuss more how listening is part of filmmaking How do we listen more instead of say too much? Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we will take questions, and I'll pass the mic.
Okay. Is this at the bottom? Okay, so one comment and then one question.
Yes.
So comment, absolutely gorgeous. Like every, I don't want to like fan out right now, but like before I was a writer, I was a designer. So my trick is that I always say, if I pause it right now, could it be a painting or a photograph? Every single scene could have been a painting or a photograph. And I'm thinking, how's this, like it's so sophisticated to me. Composition, color, contrast, the rebuking of symmetry. The center is always a little bit off, forcing attention, which is just beautiful, 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 beautiful. Anyway, the question is, how are these all amateur actors? Like everybody, everybody acts like they've been an actor forever. I mean, is that, I was thinking in my hometown, no one would pass that test. And it's probably because they've seen so much acting that they would try to emulate it.
Yeah.
Do you attribute this kind of natural comfort on camera to maybe less exposure to people on film?
I mean, that's a very good question. I would like to say that because I'm a genius, but it's not true. So what we do is really, I think the open script and the process, we spend so much time before filming. I think that's what makes the difference. And what I'm writing, I think I know my limits, that I cannot make someone, if they're non-actors, what they're not. So the script is very flexible. I would sit down and, honest question, do you think you can play this? And they would be honest, no, I don't think, but I know who can do it. Right? And then we go to that person, and how much of this do we have to tweak? So I'm not scared of tweaking. I tweak a lot of scenes. I literally have an actor who had to fight, like literal verbal fight, and he just couldn't do it. Now say it calmly, still gonna be a fight, but he's saying it in a different way. And before we bring in the camera, we do a lot of rehearsals. Like we try things out, and we just let the characters get closer to the people. And when I'm going back, because it's my hometown, I lived there until I went to university, I can already know when I'm writing who can play what. And I go to them and say, this is the thing we're gonna play, and how do we make it happen? And even like, I'm not very patient. When I do 2 takes, it's not working, we're gonna change it. And I just modify that thing. And the beauty, I agree with you. I mean, I have an amazing DOP, Sheldon Chow, who does great work. And also, we are just beautiful people, right? So filming us is easy. Yeah.
I think that, I mean, I've heard it said before that good acting is because of good directing.
Oh, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much, Mamadou. Jarama.
Jarama.
So in your short film, you have Pular, Wolof, and French all in like 3 different languages in a 10-minute film. And here on this slide, you have 4 languages. And so I'm curious how you think about representing like a multilingual society in a way that Africans are often homogenized as like one language, one culture, sort of. How do you think about, the internal diversity of, of Futa Toro, of Matam, like in your work? And how do you represent that on film, which requires a lot of translation, to go back to where you started, in terms of thinking about how several different languages translate into, I imagine like when this is shown in Senegal, the subtitles aren't in English like they are here. So how do you think about this process of translation in this incredibly multilingual society?
Jarama, that's a very good question. He's one of the rare people here I can speak my native language too, once in a while. So I think like we always grew up speaking many languages, so it's not an issue. Like people, these are 4 languages, and I speak them all. In some ways, there is no difference for me. And to the actors, if I was trying to make them, they all speak French. But when I speak French, like I speak English now, I have to think in a different language and translate it. And so I can see myself thinking. So And some of the things are just not translatable. And some of the things they pick up because they know what it means. Some of the names mean something, but that name is not translated. Some of the places mean something because that's not translated. So I'm going to just, an example is Canal Plus wanted Bamum Nafi, and they wanted it dubbed. And we said no, right? Because the thing is always, the voice of an actor is part of who they are. If an actor is not talking, if someone else is talking about what, it's a different film. And I grew up watching dubbed movies, like I know Samuel L. Jackson voice in French. I remember the first time as an adult I heard him speaking English, I'm like, that's not him, right? So I don't want to do that also in my culture. So to me, forcing people to listen to the language and the music of the language, I think is very important. So it's always shooting with the actor's language. And because the mix is always there, and just to play it naturally. French is still the administrative language in the offices, in places like that. So we're going to speak French at that point. And for me, I think I'm going to always subtitle instead of dubbing. Yes.
First of all, I echo all the comments about how beautiful it is. It's so beautiful. I have a question about the 1935 Bill No film, and how does the shadow of that matter now? Are there people that remember the time in your films when it was illegal to make films, and how does that cast either light or shadow over your film?
I think that decree was, you cannot make movies then. In some ways, there is no the training and the knowledge of making movies. So the first movies that were made actually in West Africa mostly were made by outsiders. And I want to say that I believe in outsiders' takes on a culture. And I think sometimes we overlook so many things, and an outsider coming can make us rethink the way we see ourselves. Because the definition is always, I mean, I like Teji Cole, who's here, he was saying the first time he realized he's African is when he moved to the US. Right? So it's very important also to know what other people, how do they see you? How do they perceive your culture? So by not having film industry until the 60s, I think it didn't allow a speed on which we would have made movies till now. But the reality today is, I think there are too many movies made. And they're not circulating enough. I think the reality is now, actually from Senegal, there are so many amazing movies made every year. And then the life is always the same. You produce a film, goes to a big festival, wins some awards, and silence, right? And I think this also comes from that, because the cinema is still very young in that place. We have to figure out the distribution. We have to figure out how to market, not market as a way of selling, but market as a way of connecting with audiences. Because I think if we started to make movies way before, I think it would have been very different at this point. Yeah.
Hi, thank you again for an amazing presentation. I really enjoyed all the clips from the films. I think my question is in some ways related to what you were saying about your belief in subtitles over dubbing and this kind of value of hearing the actor's voice. And I was wondering, with your more recent project in terms of the project about Augustus that you were discussing at the end, how you're thinking about casting for a role where you don't have an image of a person, but presumably, I'm not sure if there's like audio or any other kind of record of his kind of personality or his kind of body mannerisms. Like, what are the kinds of things you're looking for that stick out to you about his character from what does exist, essentially, or what also doesn't show up that maybe you can do something with potentially?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And also, that's also a way of doing in filmmaking, because every project is different. I think for Augustus, it has to be an American actor to play Augustus. And the other things can be other people. But I think for that one, it's very important to get that reality, that way of visiting a country that is different from yours, but still connected to your story. So the casting process is going to be different than this one. Yes.
I echo everything Charles said earlier and others. But I wanted to say, I think part of the story is also you. How did you get from a small town in Senegal to NYU Film School? There's got to be a story there.
That's a very good question. What's the answer? So filmmaking wasn't like a childhood dream or anything. Like, I watch movies, I enjoyed them, and I still thank my national TV of watching me so many movies, showing me so many movies, and then understanding that films is something we can do, because I've seen movies of Abdurrahman Sissako, of other people looking like me, speaking language that I speak, with rural areas. And to me, filmmaking is almost about peripheries. I'm not interested in talking about big cities, because, I mean, from my hometown, when we go to Dakar, the capital, we also say we're going to Senegal. There is this part of, like, Senegal is another place, even though we live in Senegal. So talking about that is very important. So then I went to university, I studied hydrology, because I wanted to bring water. Water is a big issue. I went all the way to my master's, and my supervisor saved me in some ways. I went to see her and say, I need to do my thesis because I'm done with my master's. And she said, Dakar University is big, it's huge, it's like 10 times over the numbers they should have. And she said, you cannot do it within 2 years because I have so many people before you waiting. And then that's how I went to a journalism school. I did an exam to become a journalist. And then when I started traveling, I realized I didn't know Africa at all. I had no idea what this continent was and how big it was, how many stories were there to be told. Because I also grew up with those extremes, you know, success stories or miserability in some ways. But between those, there were so many other stories to say. And I wanted to do filmmaking, and I knew filmmakers who were trained in France, and I thought they had so much theory and no practice. I wanted to do some practice. So I heard of New York. I visited once. I went on holidays as a journalist. And the only two schools I knew were NYU and Columbia. And I applied, I got into both. I said, I'm going to NYU because Spike Lee is there. That's how the story started. Yes. Thank you. Hey.
Hey, Mamadou,
Hey,
this is so
Raven.
beautiful.
Thank you.
So my question is, I love how you say you really have a reverence for listening, and I think that's really beautiful. And I'm curious, when you have an idea that comes to you, you know, or I'm curious how it comes to you when you know this wants to be a film, like how, and also how you trust it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I'm curious how an idea sparks for you, and also how you've learned to trust that it wants to be a film.
I think that's a very good question. Raven and I went to school together. We were in the same class. So I think there is a moment where the story became, I mean, it's a very cliche, it becomes something you really had to tell in some ways. And this would be a movie even if no one is watching it. And producers hate that, right? So in the idea of like, I have to tell this story now and I have to say it. For instance, in Demba, which is the last one, by researching it, I realized what I wanted to be told as a kid. So it was very healing for me. So as a 13 years old boy who lost his mom, it was just simple sentences I didn't hear. And I think that was one of the main reason I wanted to shoot that film. And I shot that scene, and it's not part of the movie, but it healed me in some ways. And it was as simple as someone telling me, your mother won't come back. As a kid, not hearing that was something that I believed was untrue. And the other one was just like, I think as a kid, they tell you something very confusing, that the people went to a better place. And I thought that was, she had a choice, so she left us to go to a better place. So having someone telling me she didn't leave because she didn't love you, and that's something I didn't hear. And the third thing was having people tell me, we who stayed here, who are living now, we love you as much as she did. And those things I just didn't hear. And I think in the process, when I found that, and I think this is the film I want to make, until I got that healing. And Nafi's father, Bamum Nafi, I come from a family of imams. My dad, my brother, my grandfather, all of them. And Islam was never an issue for us. My sisters never veil. Like, we go party whenever we want. It's It's not something that defines us. It's part of the culture. So to me, also talking about that, there is some kind of political thing, but I think always the personal starts. I want to tell this story first, but what is the bigger picture that can help me say it? But then the doubt is always there, as you know. By the time you're writing, by the time you're producing, you're doing, still today when I watch it, maybe I could have done something better. So there is no perfect moment, but I think deciding I'm going to live with this idea for 4 or 5 years in my life, and it's going to something that's been labeled on me, is very scary. But then deciding that because there is a personal reward in some ways of making it. Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Well, thank you so much, Mamadou.
Thank you for having me.
This is really wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.